to the things that brings us pleasure, if it's consensual, it's healthy for us. And so it kind of, I guess it was like the capstone of my experience. Like if you take this journey of being introduced to sexuality with no tools, and then being negatively socialized around it, and then undoing that negative socialization, and then coming into this healthier place, and then having a word for it, then that's where my nature is always to lift as I climb. So it's like, okay, well, let me do this for other people so that I can maybe cut their journey half the time it took me.
Right.
So that's it. That's the very long-winded version of how I got into it.
I love it. And I didn't know that Dr. Akilah Reynolds, shout out to one of my other graduates out there in SoCal doing wonderful things with adolescents at the UCLA Medical Center. Shout out to her. That I didn't know that she was the one that introduced you to that term. That's fascinating. So I'll talk a little bit about me in the sense that, one of the things that I would always say that is true about me is that I've always been a little bit outside of the margins, and not necessarily like in terms of like, I feel very connected to quote unquote communities that I belong to. I feel very connected to being a woman and my femininity. I'm a cis woman. I own that. That's important to me. I'm Black. I feel very connected and centered in my Black identity. I'm a Southern person. It's taken me a longer time to get more comfortable with that idea and kind of settle into that because of negative stereotypes around intelligence and intellect, especially being a Black girl child growing up in the South. My connection, I had a lot of disconnection with being Southern. But I think I've just generally always kind of seen the world from my own lens, which is very rarely the mainstream lens. And so for me, that has meant that I think I've been aware of my own sexuality at an early age and never. And it's fascinating because I went to Catholic school K through 5th, even though my family isn't Catholic, but I was in Catholic school. And my broader family is pretty religious. They're actively involved in Baptist church. This is Black Southern Baptist, which is not the same thing as white Southern Baptist, to be clear. But my mother and my father were not churchgoers. And I always wonder if that had this buffering effect for me. The other piece is, my mother was an avid romance novel reader, like historical romance novels, back in the day. And so I was a voracious, precocious early reader. And so I used to steal her books and read. It's on the record now, Mama, officially, if we've pretended all this time that she didn't know, but I used to read her books, probably way too young at that time to be reading it. And so I guess I didn't grow up with my own understanding of my sexuality fully co-opted by some of those negative messages. So like for me, it's like sex was never a thing to be ashamed of. It wasn't ever like a bad thing. My sexuality was always kind of integrated in my full self. But when I got to college, I started recognizing like, oh, that's not true for everybody. It shows up differently for everybody. That's interesting. And then got to graduate school, and I really wasn't very clear about what I wanted to study in graduate school. I was kind of a hot mess as a doctoral student. I'm also a person that has a lot of interests, and I'm always invested in pursuing those interests. My path in graduate school wasn't as clear. So I didn't think I'd talk about this stuff at all as a graduate student. And then I'm out on the market. I'm a newly, so then I'm on internship. And while on internship, so for those of you all don't know, if you get a PhD in the fields of either counseling psychology, school psychology, or clinical psychology, you have to do 1 year long full internship doing practice, supervised practice before you can get your degree. So I was doing my internship and I got to work in a Black women's therapy group. And so I think that was really like a game changer. So I'd been interested in group therapy as a concept in my doctoral studies, but then doing this practice, I was like, okay, here's a population that I really want to work with and better understand and study, but I don't know exactly what. And so a friend of mine sent me this article and was like, I think you might enjoy this. And it was an article written by Deion Stevens and Layla Phillips, and it was about hip hop sexual scripts. And I was like, oh my God, this blends. This is like my world coming together, right? Like I've always been, I was an old school hip hop head. And I remember like there was a lot of controversy about how Black women were portrayed in hip hop media. It's like this negative way, but I remember I never felt like I had internalized any of that. So I was always kind of really confused when people were like, this music is denigrating the women. And I was like, but if you're not a hoe, why your feelings are hurt? Like I just didn't get it. If you're not a bitch, why your feelings hurt? I didn't really get it. That probably was some immaturity on my part, and I haven't a real sense of the scope. So when I got that article, I was like, now this is something I could put my hands in, wrap my hands around, and really want to get into. But one of my challenges that I kept coming across in pursuing that line of research was that I felt like there was this inherent pathologization of Black women's sexuality. Because one of the scripts was like this freak script, right? So this is a woman that is sexually open, does whatever with whoever that she wants. And so I was seeing all of this kind of undergirding respectability politics, even in that work, and trying to look at this outcome of risky sexual behavior, right? So trying to better understand why we see disproportionate rates of STIs, and especially HIV for heterosexual Black women was also one of my research pursuits. But I kept coming around to like, why is this being so pathologized? Like, why do we have to look at it from a negative perspective to fully understand this issue? It's got to be more complex than that. And so that's where I started to move my work and really get more centered around this idea of like pleasure and like how can we move to a place of Black women owning their sexuality for themselves, defining it by themselves outside of this kind of what I found is like an oppressive context, and came across this idea of sex positivity. And then I don't even know when you and I sat down and finally was like, yeah, sex positivity, this is it, right? But we really kind of, I think, converged around that idea maybe over a year or two ago. So I'm really excited. And I think even what's been fascinating for me also is even in like embracing that term and thinking about my process at my age, looking at how I'm studying this, but also looking at my own personal journey. Like I really am so enamored with this idea that our sexuality is dynamic and grows and in its most healthy form, like deepens, becomes richer as we get older. And I feel like that's kind of this progression has happened in our work together around like talking about this stuff. We've talked about our own personal experiences. We talk about what we see with clients that we work with. We talk about the conversations we hear with our peers and family circles. And so what I have found is like the more I talk about this idea of sex positivity, how much more meaning it has for me. And that beyond anything, I think that's like my goal with our workshop, Sex Positive You, is to be able to plant that seed for women, that, you know, your sexuality has to be something that you attend to and that you cultivate. And if you don't, it kind of like you can have sex and you might even have sex that's pleasurable, but if you're not attending to it as an equal and valid part of yourself, then you're really not engaging in owning your own sexuality. And I'm trying to just really create a space for there to be a movement around that, for women broadly, and specifically for Black women, because I think we have some additional baggage that comes along with our healthy sexuality that maybe other racial and ethnic groups don't have. I hear you agreeing, affirming over there a lot. What would you like to add? Or what are you thinking and listening to me?
Oh, that's Tomas. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's Tomas. Not talking over there.
Oh, okay. I thought that was talking. No, I was thinking like, as you said that, like your goal and your scope. For me, in my core, I think I am an educator. So, and I just like knowledge. And so at first, my original goal was like, okay, yeah, there's all this great knowledge and like people need to have it. But then you think a step further, like, well, what do you want people to do with it? And what do you hope that people would do with it? Because ultimately it's their decision, it's their choice. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm with you on, you know, I think it has to be attended to that really kind of resonate with me. I think that anything that you focus on gets better. And I think that a lot of times we believe that it's just going to get, I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people that feel like, oh, it's just something, sex is just going to be great. And they kind of rely on their partner. Traditionally heterosexual relationships, and it's the female talking, you know, oh, he's going to know what to do. He's going to know this. That's, you know, he's going to know how to navigate this to the point where it's going to be a good experience for me. Mm-hmm. And I think I want people to understand that my overall scope and goal and hope for women in general, Black women specifically, is wellness. And I think that that's in every domain. Mental health, if you want that to get better, you need to attend to it. Your physical health, if you want that to get better, you need to attend to it. Your spiritual health, if you want that to get better, you need to attend to it. And I think we have been socialized and oppressed around our sexuality. And so I think particularly we need to attend to that so that that can get better and give focus to it. But because it's been a conversation that we haven't had as often, perhaps as necessary, there has not been a space. And so I'm really, really, really excited about providing a safe space in this stage of my career, just creating, curating, providing spaces to be able to attend to things that are so essential to our overall health and quality of life. I think that's exciting for me. Very, very exciting for me.
What I'd like to add also is, I want to be clear. There's an intentionality in me centering my professional identity and pursuits around sexuality, in that I like I'm saying this because I was sparked by your conversation around wellness, and I think we are very easy to talk about, quick to talk about and embrace and consider it almost a no-brainer to focus on spiritual wellness, to focus on even financial wellness, to focus on physical wellness, to focus on, to some extent, mental wellness, right? I think there's a growing embracing around mental wellness, but we still got some ways to go on that topic. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, people's sexuality, and specifically women's sexuality, kind of gets relegated to just, well, it happens, right? I think a lot of what can happen is that our broader socialization as women in this country, in this society, is to be caretakers, to be nurturers, but also to be maybe sometimes hyper focused on relationship and relational well-being. And so and all of that can kind of come together for women to defer their sexual pleasure to their partner, right? Not for every woman, and let's be clear about that. Not for every woman. I get that that's true. But I think that is the default. And I think if you're not a woman that falls into that category, it's because you've done work around that. Yeah. And you've embraced parts of yourself around your sexuality in a different way than what the status quo is. And so this is important to me in that, our sexuality is a space in which we can fully own and express who we are in our most intimate and beautiful experience. And it's something that can be done to bring a lot of personal pleasure, and something that can be done to bring around positive intimacy in a different way in a relational context. If it's done with, in a consensual, safe space. And so for me, it feels really important at this place and time in history, with all of the violence and negativity and hatred that's like swirling in this ever growing vortex in our culture, in our context, to be able to say, no, I disconnect from that and I center my own pleasure as important to me in my life because it's a right for me to have. I think that is a bold kind of revolutionary stance for women to have. I think if women can own their sexual power that helps empower them in a whole lot of other places and spaces in their life. I think that there's nothing but benefit for themselves, their communities, and for the whole world when you have women who are empowered, standing in a place of their own power. And I really feel like we got to have a conversation that centers our sexuality around that in a way that is not shaming, in a way that is not damning, in a way that is not pathologizing.
Well, yeah, to me, and so that, which is the reason why I love the sex positive word in general, because the shaming, the damning, the pathologizing has been